When you're excited about something that you're doing and you really enjoy it, it gives you more energy. And that's the contrast of when you know that maybe this is the direction you're supposed to go in, you feel differently in your body and the way you talk about it to other people changes. And then slowly your identity starts to change.
Welcome to the Blueprint Breakers podcast. What is a blueprint breaker? If you live your life outside the typical traditional lifestyle blueprint, you are a blueprint breaker. We are here to start a conversation, to assemble resources, and to build a community. This podcast is for empowered women in midlife and beyond who are preparing for a powerful next era of life. My name is Amy A. Palmer. I am your host and facilitator for our conversations. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. To stay connected, up to date, and to receive all of our free resources and gifts along the way, join us at community.blueprintbreakers.com. Today, I'm so excited to introduce you to Monica Rivera, someone who truly lives out what it means to be a blueprint breaker. We sat down for a real honest conversation about her journey from growing up in the Bronx and navigating some really tough early losses to building a career in corporate America and eventually finding herself on an unexpected path to entrepreneurship. Monica opens up about what it's like to go against the grain, find your voice, and help others do the same. In this conversation, we talk about resilience, purpose, and why showing yourself compassion matters just as much as chasing success. Hello and welcome, Monica. So good to see you today.
It's great to be with you, Amy. Thank you so much for having me here.
I have been wanting to talk to you for a while, and that's because, well, originally what came about is a mutual mentor of ours. I was specifically asking her for blueprint breakers to interview for our podcast. Women who have lived a life outside the traditional expectation. And you were the very first person that she mentioned to me. And so I don't know a lot about your story, or I know you're recent since we met virtually a couple of years ago now, I think it might be.
I know. It's wild.
So I know what you do professionally, but I'm looking forward to finding out more about what sort of led you to this point.
I'm so honored that our mutual mentor even suggested me because she's pretty incredible. So that was when you said that,
Yes.
I thought, oh, that's nice because you're in these group programs
Yes.
and she knows so many people. And the fact that she remembered me is also really lovely.
Yes. And my listeners know that I'm probably talking about Glow Atanmo, because she is still currently one of my coaches as well. So shout out to Glow for bringing us together.
Definitely.
So let's talk about your experience as a blueprint breaker. How have you lived a life sort of outside of the traditional expectation or the traditional blueprint?
That's a really big question. So I'll try to break down kind of the Reader's Digest version. So born and raised in the Bronx, I'm first generation of parents that were born Latina descent. And growing up in the Bronx was wonderful and hard all at the same time. And so I had parents who were very well intentioned, as many first gen and the immigrant story goes, where parents encourage you to take the safe route, to not rock the boat, to get the job, and really not make too many waves. And that was really good advice, but I was always someone who wanted to do my own thing. And I had all of these ideas outside of what they wanted me to do. I love the arts. I always loved business, but I loved the idea of writing and music and these different types of things. And unfortunately, what happened is when I turned 16, there was a series of events literally after the day I turned 16 that changed my entire life. So if you can imagine a snow globe, it was as if one day into being 16, someone shook the snow globe and didn't stop shaking it for about 7 years. And so very quickly, the day after I turned 16, I had two close friends that were shot and killed. They were really great guys, never got into fights. They were just wrong place, the wrong time. And unfortunately, they lost their lives as a result. And I remember getting the call that day and it almost not making sense because growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up, there were lots of people who had passed away and they had unfortunate circumstances happen to them. But as I mentioned, these were kids that were outside of those lines. And so it didn't make sense to me. It really didn't make sense. And it had such a huge impact on me. They were the first people I was ever close to that I'd lost. And then after that,
Mhm.
honestly, Amy, after that, it was my grandmother. And then 6 months later, my mom. And then a year after that, it was family member after family member. And by the time I was 23, I no longer had any biological family. And I was forced to figure out how to survive and how to pivot and what was life going to look like on my own. How was I going to make these really adult decisions at early ages, from going to college, where I was going to go, what I was going to do for work, just all of these decisions that normally you would have someone else to bounce off of. I didn't have those things. And
Right.
so that was really me living outside and creating my own blueprint of what life and success and survival was going to look like. And so I'll pause there because I know there's a lot of meat on that bone, so to speak, in that story. But that's really how it started.
Wow. So those are very formative years from 16 through 23 to have had to experience such loss. I can't even wrap my head around what that would be like. And I would think that as you were going through it, as you're a young adult having to make all these decisions and choices for how do you proceed with your life, were you able to start to, did you build a support network around you? Did you cultivate like a chosen family in some way and have some support at that point? Or did you really like forge ahead alone for a while?
I did forge ahead alone for a while. It wasn't until much later, I would say
Uh-huh.
probably in my mid to late 20s, is when I found
Uh-huh.
a chosen family. But I had friends that I had grown up
Mm.
with that I was still close to. But when I'd gone to college, I was
Right.
this city girl that was going to school in upstate New York, which felt, proximity wise, felt like it was still very close, but culturally was a completely different world.
It's a
And
different
so there was
world.
all of this change happening in me where I lost the people that were closest to me. I'm still a teenager with a brain that hasn't fully formed yet, trying to just make sense of what the world
Uh-huh.
looks like on a normal level for an average teenager going through those things. Now I'm going to college in this new place and experiencing a completely different way of life. And there were all of these things
Uh-huh.
colliding, and they kept colliding. And that first year was really tough for me in college, of where I was trying to navigate not just what it looked like to be in a new place, but also being a college student, and then also going through a lot of grief during that time. I think being
Yeah.
away from my home and on my own allowed all of this unprocessed grief to bubble up at that time when I first got into college. So that was another component of it. And as I mentioned, it wasn't until much later, after I'd graduated and come back here, where I started to cultivate that chosen family. So I had a few people that were close to me during that point. But then, to be really honest, I had other friends that it was hard for them. They didn't know the language and how to navigate those heavy topics at such a young age. And I think we're all trying to do the best that we could. And so was I. I was just trying to figure out what's life going to look like when I graduate from this place. Where am I going to go? What's work going to look like? And so those lessons about get the safe job, don't rock the boat, actually helped me later on, because I thought, okay, well, these are the things that I need to do. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do them, but I know that these are going to be the steps that will sustain me, at least in the interim, as I'm building out my survival plan.
Yeah, you were in survival mode at that point. So
Yeah.
I can imagine that you didn't really have the space or the ability to think beyond that. It was like
Yeah.
figuring out this path and figuring out these steps. And I don't want to let the moment pass without saying how deeply sorry I am for the fact that you've experienced such trauma and grief. I know we all have experienced things in different ways, and I want to thank you for being open to talking about it and sharing
Mm.
it, because you know how much that helps other people as they start to
Mm.
to hear how you've navigated these things. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I think everything that I do really originates from that place of having these conversations and
Mhm.
seeing certain things at this young age, being very close to people who are passing away. And one of the things that I've never really shaken, to be quite honest, is understanding what people are thinking about at the point of their lives where they realize they don't have much time left. And as a teenager, having these conversations and listening to my parents, my grandparents talk about the
Mhm.
woulda, coulda, shoulda had a huge
Right.
impact on me and how I live my life. And also part of the mission of the work that I do is still rooted in that very same thing because I remember the conversations of the things that they wanted to do and the plans that they had if things had worked out a different way. And I've never forgotten those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, hearing a little bit of your history also, it gives a real full context because I see your mission now and how you really help people find their voice and their passion and their purpose and their personal brand and how they bring that to the world. And I see how much you're in your genius as you share that. And it really brings it to another level to know where it's all coming from. So, like when you share that at that point as an early adult, college, just after college, you were focused on survival, so focused on figuring out what are the next steps. I need to get that job. I need to figure out how I'm going to take care of myself and not shake things up too much.
Mhm.
So, what path did you choose at that time?
So I studied economics and business, so I had a double major. And so I did all of the
Okay.
internships in college. I worked for my company's annual fund, which is telemarketing, and that will teach you a
Uh
lot
huh.
about yourself when you are cold calling people, even saying, "Do you want to get back to your alma mater? How does that feel?" So many people would hang up on me, and you really develop a very thick skin. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to pursue business. So again, I knew that was something I was interested in even as a child. And so I had the internships. I went on so many different interviews. And so when I graduated, I worked in marketing, but for a financial institution. So I worked in banking, but on the marketing side of it. And then marketing is what I did for 15 plus years before eventually starting my own business. And I loved marketing. I was good at climbing the corporate ladder. Again, safety, survival really helps you think about
Mhm.
those things because with every rung that you climb, usually comes with a promotion, an increase, a higher bonus. And so those things really were my necessities at the time. I didn't have the luxury of
Right.
thinking about what else could be fun. It was let's just try
Mhm.
to accumulate as much as we can. And it wasn't until probably in my early 30s where I just exhaled and I said, okay, what does life look like? And the way that I like to explain this is if you think about standing with the wall behind you and your shoulders are up against the wall, well, we can only see what's right in front of us, right? So only right in
Mhm.
front. But if we take just 3 or 4 steps ahead and just move away from that wall by 3 or 4 steps, now we can turn around and we have a complete 360-degree view of what's available to us. But Amy, I had spent so much time with my back up against the wall that I couldn't see that there were
Mhm.
other possibilities. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s when I took those figurative steps. And that is when I saw there are other options and other things that I can do. And that's when it really changed everything for me.
And we can't minimize the fact that, like, you became quite successful professionally in the corporate world at a pretty quick pace and at a young age. You achieved what a lot of people set out to achieve in their corporate career. You achieved like in your 20s by your early 30s, right?
Yes.
So you absolutely were a high achiever. And it seems like the voices of your mother and the messages that you got from a young age motivated you and pushed you in that direction as well.
Yes,
Do you
for
think
sure.
that's
I was
accurate?
always an ambitious child. I remember there was this book, and I think you've probably seen it before. I know parents certainly have, where it's almost the first 8 years. And so the first day of school for the first grade, you'll have a picture, and their child will say, what do they want to be when they grow up? And then it'll change for grade two, grade three. And so, Amy, if you look back at my book, I never had one thing for what I wanted to be when I grew up. I would have things like at one time, I had a hairdresser, a basketball player, and the first Latin Supreme Court justice, like all three of those things in like the third grade. And so to me, it was why can't I do these things? Why can't I play basketball and cut hair and be a Supreme Court justice? It feels totally possible to me. So there was something about part of my makeup of always having grand ambitions
Right.
and feeling as if possibility did exist. I didn't know the how, but I felt like I could do it if I just had a little bit of guidance and direction.
So where did the entrepreneurial spirit come from? Was it always there, or like, because it's very different than
It
doing the corporate
is.
thing, right?
Yes. I think for many people who have gotten into it, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I was first
Mm,
I don't want to say disgruntled, but a pretty stifled corporate worker. I'll say that. I felt
mhm,
pretty
mhm.
stifled in my role, and I had enjoyed it up until a point, and then I got to a place where I thought, is this what I'm going to do for the next 25 years? Is this what life is going to look like? And I remember what really solidified it for me. I was in the office and I had worked hybrid many years ago. And a friend called and she didn't know where I was at the time. So she called my cell phone. And when I answered, just from my hello, she said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that you were in the office." And I said, "How do you know that I'm in the office?" She said, "It sounds like your soul is disconnected from your body when you are in the office." And I thought, oh my gosh, that's such a powerful way to describe
Mm.
it. And I think when it happens within us, we can rationalize it and it's our own life. So sometimes we don't see it the same way that someone on the outside can see it. So we normalize feelings of dissatisfaction. I used to tell myself it's called work, it's not called fun, and all of these rationalizations I had given. And it was only when my friends shared that with me that I thought I do feel different. As soon as I open the door and I step out into the fresh air, I immediately feel different in my body. And maybe I should explore that. And that is when I started to think, okay, well, I have a little bit of space, I have a little bit of extra time. What can I do with this extra time? And so it started really in 2017, where I bought a microphone a couple years back, thinking I wanted to start a podcast. And I talked myself out of it, like many of us do, with the big idea that comes in the morning. And by the night, we think that was a crazy idea. I can't believe I even thought I was going to do this at 8 o'clock. Who was that person? That's the same thing I thought about myself. And I called it You Want to Do What? When I finally pressed record to start my podcast, it's called You Want to Do What, which is the name of my company, because that is the very thought that I repeated to myself. You want to do what? This is nuts. You have a corporate job. Why are you doing this? Who's going to want to listen? But I kept coming back to that one question. And I think a lot of people have that question when they want to do something and have this pivot that's completely different than what they've been doing. And then they have to think, how am I going to explain it to the people in my life? Because those are the voices that we first hear. Some people cheer for us, other people question us, some people downright say it's not going to work. So there's a mix of all of these things that are happening. And so I started the podcast. And from podcasting, all of these doors started to open by me simply talking about what I wanted to talk about, sharing my story, sharing other people's stories. And then within a year, I had an NPR fellowship. And then 6 months later, I had a TED Talk, and all these doors started to open. And so I became an accidental entrepreneur. And I realized that there's so many other women who want to do this very thing. Maybe not entrepreneurship, but at the very least, they want to be able to have something that's theirs, not just belongs
Mhm.
to another company. And so I help women do that.
I love that. So now here's the thing. So you were really deep into this successful corporate executive role, and you started to have these other desires, but you didn't have a safety net to be able to like abandon one and then jump right into another, because you were fully self-sufficient during this time. And I also talk to a lot of women, even at this stage in their life, that are deeply entrenched in a career that's starting to feel more like a job than a career. And they want to do that something new. They want to bring like some passion back and feel like they're making a difference and all the things. But financially, they're tied to whatever their role is. How did you, like, you had all those things start to happen after you did the podcast, and one thing led to another, but how did you do that while also having a full career? How is that even possible?
A lot of organization, quite honestly, a lot of organization, a lot of time management, a lot of using PTO days in service of the business. And not, I wasn't going onto the beach, I was going to a conference, or I was had a speaking engagement and I would fly to that speaking engagement. But even very early on, I put myself in
Mhm.
rooms with people that knew more than me. I think it's really important, especially in the beginning. I think always, but especially in the beginning, to have a student mindset where you're open to learning and raising your hand and asking the questions that may
Mhm.
sound dumb, but those are the very questions that will help you get ahead because you need to know the fundamentals before you can get to the advanced level of anything. And so that's what I did. I would take those days and I would dedicate them to learning more about the art of podcasting, the craft. How could I improve my sound, my editing, all of these different things. And I just really structured my days in a way that I was excited about my goal. And when you're excited about something that you're doing and you really enjoy it, it gives you more energy. And that's the contrast of when you know that maybe this is the direction you're supposed to go in because you're working more hours, but you're getting a different kind of output. You feel differently in your body, and the way you talk about it to other people changes. And then slowly your identity starts to change. And all of those things are really exciting, but you have to stick it out because that messy middle, wow, it's tears. It's what am I doing? It's a lot of questioning your choices. It's a lot of you want to do what kind of questions that I ask myself. But I love it. I really, truly love the stuff that I do.
Okay, so it does not sound like you were an accidental entrepreneur.
I mean, I
Because that
appreciate
was
you
is a
saying
lot of
that.
work,
It is a lot of work. Yes,
a
it
lot of
is.
work, a lot of effort,
Yes, and I
a
tell
lot of
everyone
drive, a
though,
lot of desire.
thank you for that. I'll never be the person who tells anyone, I think you should quit your job. I believe in two things, Bennies and Benjis, right? Bennies is your benefits and Benjis is your money. And I don't want to, there are a lot of people that will tell you, just quit your job. I think to me, that's very irresponsible without knowing someone's situation. And everyone has to do the thing
Mhm,
that feels right for them. But I always think
mhm,
we can have other paths available to us and we can see how much we want to turn up that dial, meaning how many hours we want to spend, how far we want to take it. But providing yourself an additional path, an additional income stream at the very least, I think it's essential.
and so now with your company, you wanna do what? That has evolved into a pretty robust speaking business, coaching, consulting.
So it focuses on two things, on personal brand and public speaking. And so I think to me, these are the
Mhm,
essential skill sets that we need to have. And I was sharing this recently with a friend. Every year, there's the top job skills you need for insert year here 1990, 95, 2000. And what's happened is so many people have tried to follow a blueprint of these are the job skills that I should have. And then we
mhm,
can't predict so far ahead. And so people were told, we'll work in factories. And then what happened to factories? Factories started to close. Then it was work in banking and finance. And then markets would crash and recessions hit. Then it was learn about tech. And now we have AI that's coming in. And so it's very difficult to anticipate what the future is going to look like. And that's why I am
mhm,
so bullish on personal brand and public speaking, because one, having that visibility for ourselves, it's the most important thing. Because if we think about it, when company A decides they're going to lay off 20,000 people, what happens? 20,000 people flood to LinkedIn or whatever social media saying, hey, remember me? I could really use a new job, or I'm not sure what to do next. But imagine how
mhm,
much simpler it becomes when you already have a presence, when people understand this is what Amy does and they know that they can recommend Amy for this specific role because you and I have kept in contact, because I've seen you on LinkedIn, because I've seen you at networking events. It does require a little bit more work, but what it does, in some degree, it future proofs you because people already know what you do and how you can help them. And so I think having that visibility and a personal brand, whether you work in a corporate office, if you have your own business, or anywhere in between, is really essential. And then the second piece, which is
mm,
not just public speaking going onto a stage, but what we're doing right now is a form of public speaking. Being able to communicate not just your story, but your message, again, how you can help people and feel confident in that helps with interviews. It helps with podcasting. It helps with if you do want to become a speaker and speak on stage. It's even great when you're having conversations with your partner and you're trying to negotiate where you want to go for dinner. Communication is so essential. And as of right now, AI doesn't touch that, because when we meet someone face to face, we can't quietly go onto our phone and be like, okay, now I have the answer to your question because I just consulted my friend ChatGPT over here. We need to be able to still have those conversations. And so I want people to feel comfortable doing that and also have the confidence to be able to manage the visibility and also communicating about themselves. And as women, I work with so many people who think one of two things. I don't want to show up online. I don't know what to say. I feel really embarrassed or uncomfortable. That's usually one camp. And then I have another camp of clients that think I have nothing extraordinary about me. There's nothing for me to talk about. And that really breaks my heart because we all have extraordinary inside of us. And my role as a coach and a consultant is to be the mirror so you can see yourself again. And I think women, we normalize all of the things that we do. We think that we're not special. And I think every single person that I meet has special inside of them. It's just sometimes clearing off some of the curtains that are in the way and pulling them back so that women can see themselves again.
Oh, that's powerful. Now, I'm curious to know, when you first launched You Want to Do What, did you know what your message, what your main message was going to be? Did you enhance it over time? Like, what was that particular journey like?
Yeah, I definitely enhanced it over time. At the time when I was in corporate, I just wanted to talk about something different. So you want to do what
Uh-huh,
started off as personal development. But really, it is such a
uh-huh,
cornerstone of what it is that we need, because all the strategy in the world doesn't work if we don't have the mindset to accompany where we're going with this new strategy. So personal development had always been a thing for me. I remember going to Barnes and Noble and different bookstores when we had more bookstores around. And at the time, years and years ago, it was a tiny little self-help section, right? And it was almost this shame corner where you would go in to get your self-help book and tuck it under your arm. And now personal development is huge, but I've read about self-help, personal development since I was a teenager. And so I really wanted to talk about that specifically because it helped me on my journey as I was navigating what life was going to look like on my own and understanding my mind and certain patterns that I noticed in myself, but also honestly growing up in my community and seeing the way it can be tough in certain economic environments to not have a more abundant mindset. And I understand that when it's a survival mode, it's very hard to think, oh, the world is full of possibility and I can do anything, when you're really just trying to put one foot in front of the other, where you're going from maybe check to check, hand to mouth. And so I
uh-huh.
understood that. And I just said, I want to talk to more people about this and how can we do minor shifts. I've always been a big believer of tiny shifts can lead to really big changes. And that was what I started my podcast about. And we did that for quite a while. And then people started to ask, how are you getting on these stages? And how did you build this whole brand for yourself where no one asked about any company you've ever worked for? How did that happen? And I realized more women really needed support in doing that. And I loved teaching it. I still love marketing to this day. And it's a component of, I think, self marketing, which to some people will feel really uncomfortable. But I think if you allow yourself to be curious and understand why that's so important, it becomes a little bit more like, oh, I need a little bit of that. And so I'm the person that kind of is part cheerleader, part tough love, part strategist to help combine those things. But that message certainly weaved as the years have gone on.
I love that. And I've had very similar findings with the women that I have worked with and have coached, is like feeling like they don't have enough to offer or second guessing themselves, all of those things. So with what you're doing and with how you're supporting them, it's just really giving them their voice and
Yeah.
making sure that they're able to share their gifts with the world.
We're so extraordinary. We are. We're so extraordinary. And I had a client who was telling me she's done amazing things, like not just financially, but as a mom and as just an employee and as a business owner. She juggled all these things. And she has this really robust portfolio. And she learned about real estate from a really young age. And she would save her money and learn the steps so she could get a property. And she bought a property so her parents could live in. And then eventually she was able to save up enough money with her husband and she had a property. And she had done these things that not a lot of people do, where she had just very intentionally set forth a way that she was going to help not just her parents, who she takes care of, but also herself and then her
Uh-huh.
kids. And I thought you do a really great job with this. And she says, oh, but I've been doing this since I was a teenager. I read books on this and then just saved my money. And that's all I really did. And was completely reducing everything to, I just read books and I just saved some money. Money is one of the hardest things for people to master. It's not easy necessarily to know the right steps to do and then to do it on a consistent basis. And she was reducing all of the things that she had learned to negotiate and learn about buying homes and the right questions to ask and the right place to buy and how to help support her parents as they navigated these new spaces and prepare her daughters for when they went to college so they would have a place to live when they were done with school. And all of these things, she just wanted to diminish the work that she had done and the hours and effort that she had put in to building this plan for her family. And I would not let her do that because women want to know and they definitely want to learn also from other women. And those are
Mhm.
skills that she can teach someone else. And it's so much more comfortable. Like I dread going to negotiate my car price when it's time for a new lease or to get a new car. It's always that conversation of, oh my gosh, here I go, having to really, okay, pep talk myself. We're going to be there for a long time. The negotiation is going to be laborious. It's going to be that I have to talk to the manager and all that back and forth. But there's something powerful about being able to sit across from another woman and say, hey, I want to do these same things for my family, and having that comfort of someone who really understands and wants to help you, as opposed to maybe just try to get the best price out of you in the car dealership.
So I'd like to shift topics just a little bit because I've always known that you're driven and you have a very clear mission and how you want to help women and how you want to impact your community. And clearly, even hearing a little bit more about your story, that you're a high achiever, just hard worker, all the things, right?
Thank
Very, very inspiring and impressive. My
you.
question, what I want to talk about is I think I would be remiss not to mention the current state of the world right now, which you and I have had a little bit of side conversations about feeling impacted by it. And clearly, as the daughter of first generation immigrants, even completely directly impacted by what's going on in our world. What I'm curious about is, as a high achieving woman and as somebody who has a lot of things that you want to accomplish, how are you navigating this time while going through it, while being impacted, while being faced with so much uncertainty and everything else? What are your thoughts around that?
I love that you asked this question and creating the space to even have the conversation around it. So thank you for that. It's been challenging. I will say I think about it multiple times a day. Just how do I hold both of these things of what's happening to our country, what's happening, as you mentioned, specifically to my community, and then also how do I show up as a business owner and how much do I go in one direction or another. And I don't know if I have a perfect way to navigate that because it's so much has happened in such a short amount of time. The sheer velocity of changes in this brief period of time is enough to make you dizzy and want to sit down and take a nap. I don't know if anyone else
Mhm,
feels that way, but I've certainly
mhm.
felt that way. And there are times
Yes.
where I do literally
Mhm,
take a nap because it feels so much weight and so much thought and also a lot of helplessness. What can I do? What can we do? What can be done just through the balance of power and the way things are right now? And so I don't have a perfect
mhm,
answer to it yet, but it is something that I'm mindful of. I try to have the conversations. And quite honestly, I keep coming back to this thought of I am my brother's keeper. And specifically, when I think about all of us collectively, I just wish we had more of that thought and that it didn't have to be something that directly affected us before we got on board with a mission or the why or understanding it. The thing that I would hope most for everyone is to have a little bit more curiosity about these things that are happening, certainly more compassion for what's happening. That I think has been one of the most striking things, this real lack of compassion that I see in certain groups. And when I read even comments, and I don't advise anyone do this, but if you ever see a news source that posts an article and you look at the comments underneath it, there have been times, Amy, where I thought, certainly we must all agree on this one thing. If we can't find many things to agree on, we can probably agree on this. And then I'll look at the comments and there will be so many people that have a completely opposite perspective. And I think, holy smokes, I don't know how we're going to get out of this. And so I say all that just from a really honest place of I have to stop reading the comments now. I have to stop expecting that somehow we're all going to agree again and really just think for myself, what can I do? So how can I volunteer to help groups? I've always loved volunteering, so maybe it's going to look a little bit different about where I volunteer, but then also, to be honest, it may look differently as to where I travel to. That might be different. Of course, I'm born here, but I don't know. Things are changing. Who knows what that could even be or mean? And I want to listen to other people. I want to stay informed. I absolutely do not want to turn away from it, because when we turn away from it, it just wouldn't feel good for me to turn away from it. So I still want to be informed. I want to know what's going on, but I also want to continue to affect the small piece of the world that I can, which is to still help the people that I help and leave the space open in the conversations I'm having either at a company, an organization, or working one-on-one with someone, to have those conversations and to help people with those questions who may feel, when we talk about visibility, I don't know if it's the right time to be visible. How can I help them navigate those spaces as well? So it's a really long answer to say that I think I'm figuring it out. I think if you and I talk again in a few months, maybe my answer may change or evolve as everything else is changing and evolving. It's reduction of some of the things that I see, but still tuning in so I know what's going on, but not letting myself be inundated by it. It's about tapping in the ways that I can help and support through volunteer efforts, through creating spaces in the companies that I work with and the clients that I help. And then lastly, really loving up on my family and trying to have compassion for people who even see it differently than I do, and hope that one day they will come to see our perspective and have a little bit more space for us. And that's my biggest hope.
Very, very wise words. Thank you for that,
Mm.
Monica. I think the challenge is navigating, like, it's a fine line, staying informed and making sure that we know what's going on and figuring out what we can do and what actions we can take, but not letting it, because there was a point where I felt immobilized, like I was
Same.
just paralyzed with all the information and everything that was happening and wanting to help with all of it. And I do think that you make a certain point about, for some people, this might not be the time for them to step up and step out.
Yeah.
And so that those of us who have the more privilege that you have, the more responsibility that we have to step up, get out there, put our face on it, making sure that we're taking action. And I feel the same way. I haven't figured it out either. Sometimes
Yeah.
I think I've got it going, and then I just go down like I turn a bad
Yeah.
corner,
Hmm.
you can't really tell. But for me, if I can pick one or two things at any given time that I'm going to do, and then I'm paying closer attention to my immediate relationships and my immediate conversations, and where I may have avoided certain conversations in the past, I'm not avoiding it. I'm trying to figure out a way of having those conversations with compassion, trying to understand the other person and where they're coming from before openly sharing how I feel and believe,
Yeah.
which wasn't necessarily the case before. But I see a lot of women out there who are they're managing it all. Like, they've got their career, they're taking care of a family, and then they're trying to figure out how to help save the world at the same time. And I think we're all kind of struggling with that piece.
And if I may, I would say the biggest thing is we can't normalize this, right? There's a time where, when enough time goes by, as humans, we are adaptable. But I would hope and implore people to not adapt to this. This is not normal, because if it becomes normal in one group, then it becomes a test case for how it can change for another group and then another group. And then eventually, if we have to wait for it to directly affect us, then it can almost be too late. It can be so hard to put the
That's
toothpaste
right.
back in the tube that what happens then? And so that's why it's still important to stay informed. And I love that you're sharing the conversations that you can have, you are having, and recognizing we all have different areas of privilege depending on where we come from, and understanding when it's time for us to use our privilege. This is the moment to stand up for certain things. And the same way for me, there's times that come up and we all get that roll call of when it's our time to really help each other. And that essentially is really what it is. We are connected, regardless of if we're living here in the US and someone else is in a different country. We are collectively on this earth, which is why all of these things are crucial, because it doesn't just affect one group. There is a huge effect, a ripple effect that goes on for other people. And if we really wanted to explore that, we could go down that rabbit hole of when X happens, then Y, then Z, and then we can keep going from there. And I just ask people to really think about that, not to just isolate it and put one thing in a vacuum, but think what happens to a family. And when that happens to too many families, what happens to the economy of a place? When that happens to economy, then what happens to the state? What happens to sickness, to unemployment? Like, it really does have a ripple effect in many different levels, and it's never just an isolated thing.
It's also interconnected
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
You mentioned compassion. Are you familiar with Carlos Whitaker? Do you know Carlos Whitaker?
I feel like
Or
I've
heard of
heard
him?
the name.
Oh, okay. His handle on Instagram is at Loswit,
Yes. Yes.
Loswhit.
I do know.
And he has a book that I found very comforting, and it gave me a little bit of direction. It's called How to Human. It's not political by any means. And even though he is a man of faith, it's not not necessarily a faith-based book. And to your point, I feel like we all need to relearn how to human again. We need to get back to that.
Yeah.
I suggest checking out the book if you
Yes,
haven't.
I absolutely will. I saw a recent post where it was a really lovely post. So if anybody follows him on Instagram, where his wife was traveling and she was flying over their home. And so she sent him a text saying, "Oh, I'm flying over you." And he exited his house and was waving at her on the front lawn and asked, "Did you see me?"
Yeah.
And I just thought that is so beautiful. It's like such a pure act of love and excitement and all of those things. And so I saw that actually earlier today, and it was just like a really beautiful thing. So when you said his handle, that's when I was like, oh, I just recently watched this.
Yeah,
So
yeah. His content does provide like nice little bright spots in the day, which we need.
we all need, yes, yes. And you know what? It actually
Oh,
reminded me. So I mentioned my chosen family. And so I have a 7-year-old niece from my chosen family. And so when she would go to
yes.
school, she would go past my home and I could see her from the window, and she would go past on the train. And I would stand on my terrace with this rainbow towel and I would wave the towel on my terrace every morning so that she could see me. And we would be on FaceTime and she would say, I see you, I see you. And it was just, I obviously couldn't see her, but she could see me. And I thought people must think I'm a nut standing here waving this rainbow towel every morning. But it really just made her day. And so when I saw Carlos's video, I thought, oh, I look just like that, the way he is standing on the lawn waving his arms. But also at the same time, like how much joy that must have given his wife to know that he would do something like that. And so that's the same joy that I hope my niece received every time I stood there at 8 o'clock in the morning, rubbing my eyes, waving this towel.
Oh, I love that. I can imagine it. I'm seeing you
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And I love when you talk about her on your page. I love
She's
your walk and talks, by the way, as well.
Thank
Your
you.
morning walks.
Yes, I love it. I love a morning walk. I think we should all do it. I call it really, it's my morning walks, but it's also more of a mental health walk. If we can start our day getting
Yes.
some of those endorphins and really just clearing our head, getting some fresh air, even if you can only do it for 15 minutes, I think it's a great way to start the day and just have a little corner of time for yourself before the rest of the world wants to gobble up all of your time.
Yes, I
Mhm.
agree. Thank you, Monica. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I loved hearing about it, and I look forward to continuing to chat with you in the coming weeks and months. I will make sure to put the links in the show notes for this episode so that the listeners can follow you and connect with you as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you. Thank you for sharing your space with me and also just the lovely conversation. It felt so easeful for this past hour we spent together.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Blueprint Breakers podcast, Finding Voice and Purpose. And a special thank you to our guest, Monica Rivera. Find her on Instagram at You Wanna Do What? And thank you, the listener. We really appreciate your support by subscribing, sharing this podcast with others, and giving us a 5-star rating. Have a wonderful week. Keep on breaking those blueprints and rewriting your own.